Delta species Pokemon were an extremely simple mechanic, simply being new versions of Pokemon with unique typings, such as Metal-type Pikachu, as well as having other synergies, often with each other. In this list, we're looking at some of the strongest of this unique Pokemon type. And at number 10, we have Chimecho from EX Hoenn Phantoms. Chimecho is an extremely basic card. With a pretty bland attack, its main draw was its Delta support Pokepower, which allowed you to, once per turn, return any basic energy or Delta Rainbow energy from your discard pile to your hand, as long as you had a Hoenn support card next to your active Pokemon, which effectively translates to having played one during that turn. At the time, the Hoenn supporter cards were a trainer-based engine centered around making decks more consistent. This engine was played in almost every deck at the time, largely thanks to the combined strength of Hoenn Mentor, which allowed you to set up your basic Pokemon in the early game, and Hoenn Transceiver, a trainer card that was used to find Hoenn Mentor early enough for it to matter. While Chimecho was not played in every single deck that played the Hoenn engine, Chimecho saw play in a variety of decks during the EX era, which is a term that describes the third generation of the Pokemon TCG that was the focus of the competitive play from the 2004 to 2007 format, largely in decks that heavily valued having their energy attached every turn or in decks that used the Delta Rainbow energy. Two of the most well-known decks that featured Chimecho were LBS, or Lugia Blastoise Steelix, which was one of the most dominant decks in the 2006 format, and Argon, which was one of the best performing rogue decks of all time in the late 2007. While Chimecho never saw World Championship level success, the card saw regular play throughout its legality, earning itself a spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Latios-ex from the EX Dragon Frontiers expansion. Much like Chimecho, Latios finds its place on this list thanks to its use as a tech card. Throughout the 2007 season, Pokemon EX were the core attackers of almost every competitive strategy, and as a result, Latios' Ice Barrier, which makes it immune to attacks from Pokemon EX during the following turn, proved to be an exceptional counter to all of the EX heavy strategies. In particular, decks like a deck known as Flycaddy, which was based around Flygon-ex from EX Legend Maker, and Delcaddy from EX Power Keepers, used it pretty frequently as a method of dealing with some of the Pokemon EX that could give it problems. In addition, Latios sees a fair amount of play in EX era tournaments that happen in the modern era as a counter to Arcanine EX decks that have been a consistent presence in the format. While Ice Barrier is strong, the card is equally strong for its Link Wing Pokebody, which gives itself and any other Latios or Latias that you might have in play a retreat cost of 0. This proves to be convenient for not just turning itself into a pivot, but allowing you to easily retreat Latias from EX Hoenn Phantoms, which shuts off the Pokebodies of non-EX Pokemon as long as Latios or Latios-ex is in play. In fairness, Latias is probably equally deserving of a spot on this list, as many of the decks that played Latios-ex played Latias, but due to its applications with Ice Barrier and a broad group of decks, Latios gets to take this spot instead. And at number 8 on this list, we have Raichu from EX Hoenn Phantoms. At the time of its release, Raichu was not seen as a particularly strong card. Both of its attacks appeared to be reasonably strong, but still just a little underpowered in comparison to some of the titans of the format. Zap, which does 20 damage to each Pokemon in play with the Pokepower or Pokebody, was seen as a decent spread attack in the right deck, but far from exceptional. On the other hand, Metallic Thunder just does 50 damage, but it allows you to choose to discard 2 Metal Energies to make it do 90 damage instead. At the time, there was no basic Metal Energy yet, as it was not introduced until Diamond and Pearl, so Raichu was reliant on exclusively Special Energy if it wanted to pay its attack costs. And with the difficulty of accelerating Special Energy, there was no great way to reliably power up Raichu. However, things would all change for Raichu around the 2006 US National Championships. Shortly before the event, one player gave 2 of their friends a deck that combined Raichu and Exeggutor from EX Delta Species, claiming that the deck had the potential to be a strong play for the tournament. While the deck's creator would ultimately do quite poorly with the deck, the other 2 players would both make it to the finals of the tournament, with the champion being the first and only undefeated US National Champion in Pokemon TCG history. What changed for Raichu? Well, nothing. The card had just been significantly underestimated as a synergy with Exeggutor that had not been considered, but the partnership proved to be incredibly strong, and thus, the Raichu was born. Raichu saw scattered play throughout the rest of its legality, but it never did end up putting another result comparable to its performance at the US National Championship. With that being said, the legendary performance alone was more than enough to make its legacy one of the most powerful decks in the EX era, cementing Raichu's place at number 8 on this list. And at number 7, we have Mew Star from EX Dragon Frontiers. Pokemon Star were a unique gimmick mechanic in the later half of the EX era that featured shiny Pokemon which you could only play one of in your deck total. But this came with the promise of extremely strong attacks, Pokepowers, and Pokebodies. While many of the Pokemon Star mostly failed to deliver on that promise, Mew Star was one that certainly was able to deliver. While both of its attacks were strong, the most frequently used attack was Rainbow Wave, which lets you choose a basic energy type attached to Mew Star in order to do 20 damage to all of your opponent's Pokemon of the same type. This saw major play in 2 different decks during its legality, but for different purposes. The first of this was Argon in 2007. which played a variety of different basic energy, allowing Rainbow Wave to be relevant against a multitude of strategies. On the other hand, Empoleon decks use the card 2008 as attack for the mirror match to spread damage to opposing Empoleon. Speaking of mirror matches, Mew Star's Mimicry attack was also strong in the Empoleon mirror, among other matchups, as it allows you to copy an attack of any of your opponent's Pokemon as long as you have the necessary energy to use that attack. Oftentimes you'll be unable to meet this requirement, but in a mirror match, you almost can always do so because you're playing the same energies as your opponent. Mimicry was also used in the aforementioned Argon deck sometimes, as you played multiple Delta Energy Rainbows so that you can use any attack you wanted with Mimicry. Mew Star never became the world champion in the Master Division with a peak performance of a top 4, but it achieved the title in the Seniors Division, which is for players that are approximately 11 to 14 years old, in 2008, which is more than enough success to put on a spot on this list. And at number 6, we have Exeggutor from EX Holon Phantoms. As the other spot of the Raichu duo that was mentioned with Raichu earlier on in this list, it should already be quite clear why Exeggutor is on this list. However, while Raichu was pretty much the full story for Raichu, it wasn't the full story for Exeggutor. Thanks to the strength of Delta Circle, which does 10 damage plus 10 more damage for each Delta species Pokemon that you have in play, and Split Bomb, which does 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon in play, Exeggutor found itself as an incredible multi-purpose attacker in 2006 and 2007. In 2007 in particular, it also saw play in some versions of the Argon deck as a fighting type attacker, as well as being a generally formidable attacker against decks where the fighting type is less important. As a result of these more broad applications, in addition to being a viable threat for longer than Raichu was, Exeggutor easily makes it at number 6 on the list. And at number 5, we have Metagross from the EX Delta species. While many of the previous cards were reasonably strong, Metagross marks the beginning of the cards that are truly exceptional on this list. At first glance, Metagross has a lot going on, with a strong attack and even stronger Pokebody, but the other standout aspect of the card is that it's the first on this list to be a dual-type Pokemon. In addition to Delta species Pokemon typically being a different type than usual, some of them are also partially metal types in addition to other type. Coincidentally, Metagross is normally a metal-type Pokemon, but this does not apply for all of the dual-type Delta species Pokemon. As for its Pokepower, Delta Control allows you to look at the top 4 cards of your deck and then choose one to put in your hand while putting the other 3 in the bottom of your deck. This Pokepower was an exceptional consistency boost for the Meta Knight archetype, which was a combination of Metagross as well as Dragonite, as trying to accomplish getting out the 4 to 5 stage 2s that the deck needed to function would have been nearly impossible otherwise. In the Meta Knight deck, Metagross doubled as being the deck's main attacker, with Crush and Burn dealing 30 damage plus 20 more damage for each entry card that you discarded from your Pokemon in play. At this time, this level of damage output from Pokemon that was not a Pokemon EX was nearly unheard of, and quickly catapulted Meta Knight to being one of the strongest decks in both the 2006 and 2007 format, putting up many top-level results at each year's National and World Championships. And at number 4, we have Flygon-ex from EX Dragon Frontiers. In the late EX era, there were a series of several extremely strong Flygon cards, with 2 of the stronger ones being Delta species Pokemon. While both of them could be considered to be equally deserving of the spot, as they were both pretty reliant on the other to be good, Flygon-ex was a far more critical part of the decks that played it, so it will be the focus of this spot. Flygon-ex dominated the 2007 format as one of the most potent ways to spread damage across the board thanks to the incredible strength of its Psychic Pulse attack, which does 80 damage and 10 damage to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon. The strength of this attack is made a bit more clear with the understanding of Flygon's Pokebody, Sand Damage, which places 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's bench basic Pokemon between turns, which allows you to get damage spread on the board early and then keep racking it up throughout the game. Some players also paired this card with Jolteon-ex, which places 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon upon evolving into Jolteon, allowing the damage to rack up even faster. This strategy was so powerful that it won the World Championship in the Junior Division in 2007, cementing Flygon-ex's place in the history books. And at number 3, we have Sceptile-ex from EX Crystal Guardians. Sceptile's place in history is a bit unique because, while the card never produced an exceptional result at a major tournament like the World Championships, the card is almost universally considered to be one of the most powerful Delta species Pokemon ever printed. Its extra liquid Pokepower makes it so that Pokemon EX cannot use Pokepowers, and it costs an extra energy for them to attack, acting as an extremely powerful disruption tool against strategies heavily based around Pokemon EX. As a result of this disruption, Sceptile-ex is also able to make its own attack, Power Revenge, which does 60 damage plus 10 more damage for each prize card that your opponent has taken. A bit stronger, as in the late game, when the attack is the strongest, it's typically quite difficult for your opponent to produce an adequate answer given the constraints of Power Liquid. However, it must be noted that, despite the attack cost saying it's 1 Psychic and 1 colorless energy, it is effectively 1 Psychic and 2 colorless energy, as Power Liquid applies to Sceptile-ex itself as well. Sceptile-ex saw play in numerous strategies in 2007, from Argon to Meta Knight and everything in between. And at number 2, we have Dragonite from EX Delta Species. Not surprisingly, the other half of the Meta Knight duo also appears on this list. Unlike Metagross, Dragonite was strong for Meta Knight almost exclusively thanks to its Delta Charge Pokepower, which attached a lightning energy from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Reminiscent of Blaziken from EX Ruby and Sapphire, which was then considered one of the strongest decks of the entire EX era, many players immediately saw potential for Dragonite's Pokebody, as it was nearly identical. As expected, they were correct, and the card proved to be exceptional in Meta Knight decks, as it proved to be one of the most powerful and iconic decks of the entire EX era, being a dominant force in the metagame for its entire legality. However, Dragonite did not just see success in the Meta Knight archetype, as there were a handful of other strategies, such as one that used Electivire, that players created later on that would prove to be quite powerful with Dragonite as well. Finally, at the number 1 spot on our list, we have Rayquaza-ex from EX Delta Species. Between its strong attacks and stronger Pokebody, Rayquaza-ex is an absolute powerhouse when compared to most of the other Delta Species Pokemon. Its first attack, Delta Circuit, deals 30 damage to any of your opponent's Pokemon for just a lightning energy and a colorless energy, but this is upgraded to 50 damage if the target Pokemon has a Pokepower or a Pokebody. Its second attack is a bit less interesting, however, just doing 70 damage for 2 lightning and 2 colorless energy. Most of the time, this attack would never be used, but thanks to its Pokebody Rage Aura, removing all colorless energy from Rayquaza-ex's attack cost as long as you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, both attacks become extremely powerful and energy efficient options. During its legality, several decks made use of this powerful Pokemon, but no deck did so as well as the World Championship deck in 2007. Rayquaza-ex is even stronger in an alternative format, simply called the EX era format, that uses all of the cards that were printed in the EX era. While this format did not exist at the time in the TPCI rating zones such as Europe or the United States, it was the format in Japan at the time, and as a result it has seen an uptick in popularity in the modern era as a fun format to revisit. In that format, it is a key component of a deck known as Railer, which is considered by many to be the absolute best deck in that format. The result of this card was able to produce during its brief legality made an easy case for Rayquaza-ex being the absolute best Delta Species Pokemon of all time. Alright, and that's the list. If you think we missed any other cards that should be in this list or have ideas for future videos similar to this one, we'd love to hear about those down in the comments.